Welcome to the Altadena Historical Society presentation of Robert Owens, Altadena heroic Black entrepreneur and El Prieto Canyon. And it's presented by Erik Hillard. And I want to tell you a little bit about Erik. Erik grew up in the Central Coast, Monterey County area. He came to Altadena about 15 years ago. He owns and runs a locally based small business in the professional photography industry. He graduated from UC Davis and the Art Center School College of Design. Erik is the CFO, treasurer of Lowelifes, Respectable Citizens Club, and it's Lowelifes, spelled Lowelifes. And he was the first board director. Lowelifes, Respectable Citizens Club is a trailblazing organization based in Southern California's Angeles National Forest. The Lowelifes are dedicated to trail restoration and maintenance. They work to foster conservation, sustainability, and community in the Los Angeles area. They also are interested in the history of the forest and its trails. Erik Hillard is here tonight to present the results of his research on Robert Owens and how Altadena's El Prieto Canyon led him to become the wealthiest Black man in LA County and arguably one of the wealthiest men in LA County. So Erik?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I am Erik Hillard with the Lowelifes Respectable Citizens Club, and I am not the first board director, but I'm one of them. I've joined with two other great people to run our organization, and I'm very thankful for everybody coming out tonight to hear this very important story. It's a little known story of El Prieto Canyon, but it's extremely important. And when I started this research about 2 years ago, I really just wanted to focus on a light on Robert Owens and share the story broader. At the time, I didn't even imagine I'd be speaking in front of all of you, sharing a presentation. So this is fantastic. It's definitely a next step in the goal of sharing the story of Robert Owens, and I'm very grateful for all of you coming tonight. I'd like to also talk a little bit before we get started about what the Lowelifes Respectable Citizens Club is. We're a small nonprofit based here in Altadena, and our main focus is on trail restoration in the Angeles National Forest. Our crew is made up of a very diverse users, mountain bikers, trail runners, hikers as well, and we all come together with the common goal of restoring trails in our public lands for public access. In 2022, Lowelifes recently completed our restoration of the Condor Peak Trail. It's a 10-mile single track in the northwestern Angeles National Forest. It's a phenomenal trail that's very remote and hadn't seen much maintenance or use in decades. And it's a fantastic place, and especially in the wintertime. And if anybody's adventurous, I highly recommend getting out there. Currently, our volunteer crew is focused on doing trail restoration in the recent Bobcat Fire burn area. We're working on the Gabrielino, Canyon de Boer, and Silver Moccasin trails. And before I get started, I'd like to thank a few people. Very grateful to local Altadena historians Paul Ayers and Michelle Zack for talking with me and sharing resources about Robert Owens during my research. Also Eric Molfinger and the Altadena Historical Society volunteers that during the shutdown talked to me very often via email, sharing maps and resources because I couldn't come to visit during the shutdown. And without their generosity, a lot of this information wouldn't have come together. I'd also like to thank my good friend Carson Blaker, who shares my passion with the history and helped me a lot with writing my article and lots of feedback. Meadows resident Dave Ryan, who gave me a lot of inspiration and feedback as I wrote my article as a longtime resident and lifelong resident of the Meadows and Altadena. And also my wife, Peggy Casey. Without her support and patience with all of these things that I like to do, I wouldn't be doing them. So to start with, How many people know where El Prieto Canyon is? Love to see a show of hands. All right, a lot of you, fantastic. So for people who don't, El Prieto is located in between northwest Altadena and La Cañada. It's a beautiful watershed filled with oaks and generally year-round water. You can see here on the left, this is El Prieto Canyon, and it's just filled with oaks as it goes up towards the ground. The trail has seen tons of use on a daily basis from mountain bikers, hikers, the occasional equestrians. I'd also like to stop too and acknowledge that before Robert Owens and anybody had come to this land, all of this area was inhabited by the Gabrielino and Tonga. It's important to know that this history we're looking at is recent in the big scheme of things, and I hope that we will also look deeper to see what the history is before Robert Owens and some of the names and lifestyles and resources that came out of the canyon for the indigenous people here. So El Prieto is one of the most popular single track trails in the forest, and as a heavy trail user, it always was shocking to me that no one really knew what was behind it, what was behind the name. It surprised me. I scoured maps, and it's pretty much the only Spanish-named trail in the front side of the forest here. And I always wondered, like, why that? Why is this named this? And if you literally translate El Prieto, it's dark colored or blackish. If you talk about the Southern California Spanish, it's commonly used as the dark-skinned one. In jest in a family, the darkest skinned kid might have been called El Prieto. If you look though directly into Mexico, we have a family friend who was from Mexico City, and he said that no, it's much more direct. It's directly black, African, and it's about race. It's not about skin color, etc. And as we go deeper, we start to see El Prieto Canyon is not about darkness, not about the shade. It is very specifically about Robert Owens, a man who lived there. So through research, I started to pull some articles, looked at some of the historical books like John Robinson's The San Gabriels and Michelle Zach's book, and we find that Robert Owens is definitely connected to this canyon. To start, it's very important not to confuse Robert Owens with the Brown brothers. Very well known, sons of the abolitionist John Brown, and they also were in El Prieto Canyon, but about 20 years after Robert Owens had already passed away. So the name is just coincidence. There's no connection between Brown brothers and Robert Owens. Robert Owens was born into slavery in 1806 on a Texas cotton farm. Was very handy, very smart. He learned to read and write in the evenings after hard work on the farm. He was able to sway his enslaver to hire him out to other landowners, and they split the income. So with that means, he was able to purchase his own freedom. At age 47, he left for California. He had planned to come to California where freedom was, where slavery was abolished, and work, raise money to buy the freedom of his family back in Texas. When he got to LA, he found that California, Los Angeles, was not quite as friendly as he had heard. Even though slavery was abolished and it was illegal, those laws weren't necessarily enforced, and there was still very heavy racism. So he ended up settling in the foothills of the mountains here, the San Gabriels, in El Prieto Canyon. At that time, the 1850 census counted only 12 blacks in California. By 1860, the number had grown to 60, but still very, very few people here. So Robert Owens' cabin site approximately is in El Prieto Canyon, and this is a place that he settled and at least did some of the timber work that he did later on. This map here is from the Altadena Historical Society, and up here, number 16, is Robert Owens' cabin site. I took a Google map and tried to overlay this hand-drawn map with Google's maps, and it gives us a little bit of a perspective of where things are with the El Prieto Trail. So this is in the very upper part of the El Prieto Trail. You can see here the Brown home site, Rising Hill Road, etc. Carson and I spent one day exploring the area with this map and GPS and kind of trying to see, like, you know, where we thought maybe at least along the trail it was. It's probably somewhere near one of the first check dams as you're coming down. However, there's decades of poison oak. And also this area was impacted by the 2009 station fire and probably others before that. And there's so much sediment flow that you don't even see any flat areas. From what I've heard from others, the last time the ruins of the cabin were seen were around 1960. One of the first instances of connecting Robert Owens and El Prieto Canyon is in this 1896 Pasadena Searchlight article. It talks about Robert Owens, who also was known as Uncle Bob, and it refers to Negro Canyon. Also in this is a crop out of a 1920 U.S. Forest Service map that refers to Negro Canyon. That is on the inside cover of John Robinson's San Gabriel's, but only the 1991 edition. In 1934, the maps then changed to El Prieto. This is from the 1934 USGS Mount Low quadrangle. No other maps I couldn't find any other maps earlier than this 1934 online. And every other map after that refers to El Prieto. So Robert Owens, when he settled here in this canyon, he started doing odd jobs. He was very handy, as I had mentioned, very intelligent. So he started doing odd jobs in the Los Angeles area and basically commute from the canyon to downtown and back. Really long days, especially when there was no 110 freeway. So it took him about a year, but he raised enough money to purchase the freedom of his family. And Winnie and his 3 children then came out to California to be with him. It's noted that in 1854, the Owens family hosted the first formal religious service for blacks in Los Angeles County. I'm not sure if that was in El Prieto Canyon or a home in Pasadena or somewhere else, but Robert Owens was known to be very religious. He carried a Bible with him at all times, and this was one thing of note in some of the early newspaper articles. People recognized that they were very intelligent, very pleasant, and they were nicknamed in LA County as Uncle Bob and Aunt Winnie. In 1862, Robert Owens secured a contract with the United States military to supply wood for fuel in their forts. El Prieto Canyon supplied an ample amount of oak, and Owens created an extremely steep road from El Prieto Canyon over into Millard Canyon in order to bring the wood out into Los Angeles. This became known as Uncle Bob's Trail. It's now completely overtaken by nature. In pre-station fire, I know that Paul Ayers did some walkthroughs and there were some areas where it was kind of visible, but my understanding now is it's pretty much been erased. On this 1939 USGS map, you can see here that green line is Uncle Bob's Trail. And then on the right, I again overlaid it with a Google map. And it basically started around just past the top of Rising Hill Road, the private section, right after the U.S. Forest Service gate. And then very steeply here, really steeply drops down into the canyon. And then from here, he would have brought all of the wood all the way out to Millard. A lot of my research for all of this was basically done online. And these handwritten notes here are a couple of new things that I found recently. They're part of the Miriam Matthews photograph collection from the UCLA library. And they're written by Robert Owens' grandson, Robert Curry Owens. It's pretty neat to be able to see something so direct from so long ago. And it really talks about stuff that I've already kind of known, but some things are different. The first thing he notes that in 1850 is when his grandfather arrived in Los Angeles. Everywhere else, the date 1853 had been carried over. Clearly similar, but interesting to see some difference. He continues to talk about a bunch of well-known, intimate friends, and talks about what Robert Owens Sr. moved into business-wise after some of his work in the canyon. He established livery services in downtown it was now downtown Los Angeles. Livery services basically has anything to do with equestrians and horses, from rentals to ferrying to tack, feed, etc. And his place became like the go-to spot in Los Angeles for people who were passing through and needed horses to go into the mountains, etc. And at that time, he purchased land that was on the outskirts of LA. We consider this downtown LA now on San Pedro Street, but at the time, it was the boonies compared to the city center. So as the city started to expand and his land became more part of the city, its value skyrocketed. And he became a wealthy landowner, and he continued to purchase more and more land and started to do more land development. One of the first things that I started to look for when I was doing this research was photographs of Robert Owens. For me, putting a face to his name was probably my first goal in the research I was doing. I wanted to know what this guy looked like. I wanted to see who Robert Owens was. And unfortunately, there are no photographs of Robert Owens. Photography was very uncommon in the 1850s. It was a technology that was just starting. And Owens passed away in August of 1865 at the age of 59. And there are no known photographs of Owens. John W. Robinson, the author of the San Gabriels, the book that probably many of you know, he contacted Miriam Williams, who in the 1970s here in Los Angeles was building a pictorial history of early black settlers. This letter that came from the John Robinson collection at USC is from Miriam to John Robinson, expressing that no, she does not have any photos of him. However, this letter became very important to me in my research because it not only confirmed that the dead end of no photos, but it also confirmed the family lineage of Robert Owens. It connected for me who his son was, who the grandson was, etc., because the photos that we do have are of Robert Curry Owens. And Robert Curry Owens is his grandson. Another important part for me was also having here her directly connect, asking Robinson if he knew that El Prieto Canyon was actually in honor of Robert Owens. So this is grandson, Robert Curry Owens, at the age of 30. At this time, photography was becoming much more common, 2 generations later. And Robert Curry Owens followed in his grandfather's path. He was also a very successful real estate developer in Los Angeles. Even in his development contracts, he stipulated that blacks be hired to work at the properties and work in the construction. Those properties were along 10th Street and a full block near Broadway and 3rd. So Robert Curry Owens was the child of Charles Owens, and Charles Owens was the son of Robert. Charles married Ellen Mason, the daughter of Biddy Mason. So many of you probably know Biddy Mason already. She's been a well-documented and famous person in Los Angeles history. And Charles met Ellen because of his father. Robert Owens played a very important part in the life story of Biddy Mason. Biddy Mason became the wealthiest or the richest colored woman west of the Mississippi in her time. She built a vast real estate empire and started a business early on helping women with childbirth and supporting them. Her story is very interesting, and Robert Owens played a big part. In 1851, around the same time that Owens came to California, she arrived in San Bernardino, California, as the slave of farmers Robert and Rebecca Smith. They came from Mississippi via Salt Lake City, and she came with her 3 daughters. Although in California, slavery had been outlawed, the Mormon farmers kept this truth from Biddy. So she didn't know. She had no idea. She functioned as previously, not knowing that slavery was illegal in California, and technically she was free. In time, she started to meet other black people in the Los Angeles area, and that included the Robert Owens family. In 1855, Robert Smith became very concerned that his slaves were going to be taken away from him because word was getting around that he was keeping people illegally. So he fled into the Santa Monica Mountains with plans to leave for Texas. Robert Owens and the Los Angeles sheriff at the time rode out to the mountains together and served Smith with legal papers for illegally holding slaves in California. For me, this fact stands out as phenomenal, that at the time, a formerly enslaved person from Texas, in the 1850s, when racism still had to be running rampant, collaborated with the sheriff in the Los Angeles area, rode out together on horses to free someone. And that collaboration with law enforcement in Los Angeles at that time just shows how respected member of a community he was, and that he crossed all boundaries and was able to convince the sheriff at the time that this was an important thing to do. So after Biddy gained her freedom, she grew a successful midwife business and then built her real estate empire, starting with a purchase on Spring Street. Currently in downtown Los Angeles, near the Grand Central Market and the Bradbury Building, is the Biddy Mason Memorial Park. And all of this would not have happened without Robert Owens. So today, El Prieto Canyon is heavily used by the public, and no one knows the story. We started out with trying to shine a light on this, and Lowelifes has been collaborating with the U.S. Forest Service about putting in signage so that people know about this. There's existing signage already through the forest about the Mount Low Railway. This is an example of some of the signs that are up there along the trails. Some of you may know them as very familiar. They've been up there for a long time. And so we've currently been working with the Forest Service to try to install a very similar sign, but with content about Robert Owens. I'd really like to see more research and connection done with this with the community. I'd like to see us find out more about the canyon in regards to the Tonga and the Gabrielino tribes. And I'd really like for this story to continue on past this room tonight, for everybody to talk about this to other people. The most important part of all of this is that we shine a light on Robert Owens and this story so that people here in this community know about it. I've been shocked over the 2 years I've been working on this and speaking to Black residents in my neighborhood, in the meadows, where there's even an El Prieto road, and nobody knows about Robert Owens and this connection. So I really thank everybody for coming tonight, and I really hope that people will continue to tell this story, because it's very important and it needs to continue to be shared. So thank you very much. If anyone has any questions, I'm game to try to answer. Most of the information I know is in the presentation, but I'm happy to try to answer any questions. Yes?
What caught your interest in the first place?
The unknown, I guess. I mean, I've always been very curious about the history of the forest as a trail user. I think some of that was sparked by seeing all of the Mount Low history signs up in the forest, so that made me aware already of what was happening here. And the difference of it, wondering why El Prieto? Like nothing else around here has a Spanish name, and it was clearly named for something. So I guess it was partly just curiosity.
Thanks.
Yep. Yep.
Are any descendants still around here at all?
Not that I'm aware of. It's not something that I've necessarily looked into. I do believe in the letter from, in this letter, yeah, I don't think, somewhere I feel like I read that there wasn't anybody who had been connected, but that's not something that I've been able to find. But I would welcome anybody who wants to try to research that, because I think it'd be great, because they may not even know. Yes? Do you have your hand up?
I thought you
Or Eric?
So you mentioned his wife Winnie.
Yes.
I don't get the connection between Winnie and Biddy. I don't know that.
I don't believe there's a direct connection between Winnie and Biddy. Biddy Mason, you mean, yes? No, the connection between the Owens family and Biddy Mason is first Robert Owens helped facilitate her freedom. And then Robert Owens' son, Charles, married Biddy Mason's daughter, Ellen. So Winnie's son married Biddy's daughter. And then their son is Robert Curry Owens, who is the only person we have photos of. I mean, and what an amazing photo. I mean, if we're gonna have one, that's pretty beautiful. Yes?
I wanted to know about where Robert Curry Owens lived. Was it in LA or here or where?
My guess would be it would be in Los Angeles, because that's where he was doing most of his real estate development. It's noted that he did a lot of real estate development around Broadway and Third, but that's very much a presumption on my behalf. Yes?
Would you make the slide presentation available online so we can take our time to read looks like it?
Yes, the plan, my good friend Peyton here is recording this. The idea is we're going to edit this and put the presentation into the video and put it up online. He's also graciously offered to delete all of my ums and uhs and stuff. Yes?
First, thank you so much for this presentation. And I have a comment and a quick question. The comment is that we're talking about the Brown brothers, that we're hoping also to put up a sign, not just about Owen and Jason Brown, but overlooking the canyon to put up some kind of historical interpretive sign with information about Robert Owens too, because they're completely adjacent. Little Round Top is adjacent to El Prieto. And my question is, at some time I heard there was an idea being floated that the canyon might be renamed Owens Canyon, since we know who it's named for, rather than someone who's an unknown dark one. Why isn't it called Robert Owens Canyon? And I wondered if you could
It's a
comment
very
on
good
that.
question. The Forest Service is currently, as many people know, already going through maps, monuments, trails, and renaming things that have been disrespectful to indigenous people. And that has already happened in a lot of places, mostly in reference to Squaw. It would not surprise me if something similar happens here. This is very much on the Forest Service radar. And we'll see what happens. I think that there's a lot, it's a bit of a complicated question and answer. I think for at least myself personally, I don't really feel it's up to me to have a real big opinion on what happens with the naming. I want there to be a connection with the canyon to Robert Owens and people know about the history. I think that completely erasing El Prieto from the map is also erasing the history of the racism. And for me, that's an important part of the story that I don't necessarily want to see erased. I think that that's an important part of history that shouldn't be forgotten. That it's been 200 years of his name not being on the map. And just replacing all of that history it just doesn't feel right to me. I also think that we should be opening up the concepts and looking at Batonga and Gabrielino and what is their stories with this canyon. And just because we found out about Robert Owens and his life there, it doesn't necessarily erase what happened well before him.
What about Joseph Chaplin? piece also.
So I think it's important discussions for the community to start to think about. And obviously the Forest Service now with their new representation is very open to some of these name changes. It's a very slow process dealing with the Forest Service, but they're open. And it's definitely a conversation that has been happening. And I'm looking forward to them at least getting the sign up. We've made a lot of progress over the last year and had a site visit even about where a sign can go and that kind of stuff. So we're now in the process of designing something that is similar to the Mount Low Historical that could go up to talk about Robert Owens and his connection to the canyon. And from there, I think it's really up to the community to, what people want to change. The government should, or the Forest Service, should listen to the people around here of what they would like to see happen. Yes?
Yeah, do you know anything about the age of the dirt road that, let's say, starts at the Millard Canyon Campground that goes over into El Prieto, and the different stages after that going clear up to the dead end at the Brown Mountain, ridge where you have
I
that.
think you're talking about 2N65 or 2N68. It's
Whatever the
Millard
number
Canyon
is.
Ridge Road.
I followed
one of
that
those.
all the way to the end. What's that called? The Ken
You mean
Burton Trail.
all the way up to Ken
Yeah,
Burton?
right to that saddle there.
I mean, the roads have been on the map for a long time, but even back in, I don't know if they're Forest Service roads or.
Well, I figure they're fire roads, but was there any connection with maybe an early settler building the first stage of that road?
I'm not aware, but
As
I mean,
opposed to that
in this
steep trail.
1939 map, they're
Yeah.
there. That's them, the red
Oh, okay,
the red roads,
there
and
you go.
that's 1939.
Yeah.
Maybe even doesn't look like they're there in the 1934, but it's hard to tell on such a single color map.
Mhm.
I don't, I'm sorry.
Yeah, all right.
Yes,
So did he purchase the land in the canyon, or did he?
I don't believe so. I don't believe it. There was any ownership, quote unquote. I think it was settling in
And that's common for the mountains, people to settle in the mountains?
I mean, at that time, there probably wasn't a whole lot of enforcement, and probably a whole lot of claim to it. I would imagine, especially in a rugged spot like El Prieto Canyon, people definitely weren't settling there. It wouldn't be an easy place to live. Very difficult to get in and out of, to trade, etc. But I don't believe there was any ownership of land. Yes?
Did he die there?
In El Prieto? I don't believe so. I imagine by the time of his death in the 1860s, he probably was living in the city of Los Angeles where he was building the real estate
Do we
empire.
know where he's buried?
I do not know where he's buried. However, what I'm really hoping, and I already know with speaking with Veronica, that this presentation is going to start to spur people looking for some of these answers. Because it would be fantastic to find out where he's buried and et cetera. Yes?
So he took all that lumber out without owning the land also?
I presume so. I mean, back then, I don't know, maybe he did own the land, maybe he bought it from somebody, I really don't know. I'm definitely making assumptions that land was not necessarily quote unquote owned in the mountains compared to in the city.
Yeah, I don't think that would have in common for lumber to be taken out of the mountains without any.
Yeah, I would presume that,
Right, because the whole came down to the mission, a lot more came down to the mission. I doubt there was any ownership.
yeah, at the time, I doubt there was any enforcement at least, yes.
So how close to, how far up into the mountains was there any kind of settlement in Pasadena and Altadena? In Mountain Hill and Pasadena, Altadena, Michigan, so when he was first settled in
That's probably about as deep. I don't know, definitely not an expert on the rest of the settlement stuff, but I would not expect beyond people who are doing mining and other things like that, people were not going up into the San Gabriel Mountains very far. It's an extremely steep and very inhospitable environment.
I'm just sort of wondering, just below that, how far
I'm not really sure. But I think that the information is definitely accessible, especially in like Michelle Zach's book. Altadena definitely probably has a lot of that information. I personally have not focused much of my interest and research into the city. It's much more, for me, I've been much more interested in what happened in the forest. Anyone else have questions? Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate everybody coming tonight.